The war in Ukraine has been going on since 2014. For almost 8 years, thousands of surviving veterans chose different ways home. Someone went to trainings and started life from scratch. Someone plunged into loneliness and despair. But after the large-scale invasion on February 24, 2022, it is very difficult to calculate statistics on Ukrainian veterans and their lives after the war. All we want to convey is that life is worth living, and there is always a way out.
Оживе все знайоме до болю, і дитинство, й розлука, й твоя материнська любов. І на тім рушничкові оживе все знайоме до болю, і дитинство, й розлука, й твоя материнська любов.
PTSD in veteran statistics. An estimated 354 million adult survivors of war worldwide suffer from PTSD and/or major depression. Compared to others, I did not spend much time in the ATO zone. At the end of autumn 2014, I was injured and went on a long vacation. I did not return to the front then, because at the time when I had a chance, our volunteer battalion, Dnipro 1, had already been withdrawn from the front line. I finished my service in 2016, resigned from the battalion and moved to Lviv, where I got married. My wife is also from Donbass, and we moved there together. We are now immigrants from the east of Ukraine to the west. It is not the first generation to move back, and it is obvious that they are not doing it on their own free will. I believe that the time has come to stop this shameful practice of resettling Ukrainians. Ukrainians should live where they want to live, not where they were forced to live by taking away their homes and lifestyle. About 30% of Vietnam veterans had PTSD during their lifetime.
Спинальный больной довезли до Краматорска. Показатели. Ромчик, Ромчик, Рома, Рома. Ну, такое, приглушенный. Все.
One day, I saw my father, who worked as a boiler equipment operator at the thermal power plant, after a shift. He was covered in soot and oil. Then I said that I will work in a white coat. In my third year at the institute, I started working as a nurse in the cardiology department of the Central Military Clinical Hospital. I chose military medicine as my specialty, because that was the name of my department. I guess I also liked the title. My specialization is cardiology and intensive cardiology, and since it is quite specific, I was sent to the Odessa Military Hospital. I was brought to a company stronghold outside Turetsk, near Horlovka. On the other side of the field was the enemy. Upon arrival, I had only time to drop my backpack when the battle began. I asked, what should I do? From the normative vocabulary, I heard only the word machine gun. We had to run forward. I asked where to shoot. Before that, in my entire life, I shot only 5 times. Until the morning, the guys taught me. I still don't wear epaulets. From the first day, I was told to either wear them or do not at all. A study of 1,938 veterans shows that the prevalence of PTSD was about 14% among veterans who served in Iraq. All of us who have been at war since 2014 were ready. We understood that one way or another we would have to meet the arch enemy once again and finish our work. I can say that the experience of 2014 to 2018 was extremely difficult for me. But at the same time, these are my youth and my best years. In 2014, I was in Slavyansk, then in Pisky. There were new people, friends, colleagues. In the future, we became close friends with many of them, and with some we became each other's best men. The experience I gained during 4 years of taking part in the ATO and OUF allowed me to meet the latest round of military confrontation in a more meaningful and organized manner. Now I'm more used to shellings, and with such a background, you adapt to something new faster than it was before, or than those who have no combat experience at all. A reported 10% prevalence of PTSD has been extrapolated to all Gulf War veterans.
It was a need because it was 2014, that's it. The war began and I needed to know something about it. What it is, how it works, where I can find a job for myself in all this and what I can do. I read military psychology works a little, just for myself. As a teacher of management psychology once said, nothing unusual, everything is the same, but in conditions of war. And what's special about it is certain states of a person who falls into military actions, who then returns, what happens to them during the war, and what happens afterwards.
A military doctor should not be on the front line. This is the law. If you are in the unit, then you must perform all functions, from a soldier to a commander. All must be interchangeable. The guys joked, "Doc, learn to shoot with everything, because if we get shot, then at least you can shoot back." It all starts very simple. 5 people standing, RGD-5. A message comes through the radio that they open fire on us from a heavy machine gun and we need to answer. There was also a group of people who said that they were from the special services, and a young girl. We answered from all barrels. The law of war says, always think about what will fly back to you. In response, we were heavily shelled with mortars. One mine hit the shelter. The girl's leg was torn off at the very pelvis. I could not fix the artery even with a clamp. I give 4 injections and say, "Cat, goodbye." Many people who gave the best part of their lives, their youth, to Ukraine, are of course filled with emotions and the desire to carry out Ukrainization or derussification by some violent method. But we live in the 21st century. We often hear thoughts like, "I would shoot them, send them to the camps," and so on. But it won't happen. No matter how much someone wants it or not, it's all fantasy. It is obvious that we all need to think together about how we should return the Ukrainian consciousness to the east and south of Ukraine, to the heads of the people who live there. It will be hard work for years, work of future generations. After all, before that, the Ukrainian consciousness was cruelly and violently squeezed out of these people during the life of several generations. At this moment, a mine comes from behind. Vitalik was wearing a helmet. In the morning, a dog that used to hang around our shelter tried to eat his brains. When everything was done, I had to take them home. I couldn't find a leg within a kilometer radius. The son of the deceased girl asked me, Where is my mother's leg? The first killed is the accusation that you did not save them. There is no way to sew up femoral bleeding in such conditions. The case is fatal. The first patient to die. Every doctor has one.
First of all, I was interested in the topic of trauma and PTSD, and therefore I know a little more about it. I can say that there were ever studies conducted on trauma were related to the so-called combat shock. And these studies began back in 1914, that is, after World War I, when it was noticed that people who returned from the war somehow had changed, something had been happening to them. That's when the term shell shock or combat shock came up, and deeper studies of this subject started. I cannot say that military psychology in 1914 went to the army. In fact, only specialists were involved, and only practical issues were in the spotlight. This is needed. We study it and start using it there. And probably until the Vietnam War, no one really cared about it. There were some studies about how it usually happens. There is research and there is life, and they have nothing to do with each other. However, in 1968, when the veterans of the Vietnam War returned, they faced alcoholism and what is now called PTSD. And what happens to the veterans, how they suffer. Suicides after the war, divorces, a lot of such issues.
I was admitted to a military hospital in the psychiatry department. I had a nervous breakdown. After accumulating all the emotions inside you for almost 2 years, you put a block in your head, so to speak, in order to be able to act soberly and be ready for extreme situations. If it were in a peaceful life, I would of course react roughly and emotionally to many events. For example, if I was to witness a car wreck. But for me it has become, one might say, commonplace, because I simply have no choice but to adapt to all these conditions. You either adapt or pack up and go home. When I was being transported with a shot in my leg, the car skidded. It was full of bullet holes. One guy then fell on my wounded leg and broke it, twisted it. The rush of adrenaline allowed me to straighten my leg and put it in place. I couldn't even imagine such a thing before. Until recently, I used to pass out when I saw blood. But this applies to everyday life. In an extreme situation, an adrenaline rush occurs and you become indifferent. At that time, I again began to dream of the war, the screams. There are many people with mental disorders, because a completely normal person does not return from there. Everything stays inside you, and when you go to a CT scan, they find multiple sclerosis. This is when you get up and lose consciousness, and then you realize that it's all from there. These are all stressful situations.
Perhaps because our army has not participated in military operations since 1945, only in some local conflicts, and the special forces worked there, not the army. There was no such applied and developed military psychology in our army. By the way, our army is not that old. Therefore, since 2014, when we faced what was happening, the same gap has returned. Even the same Afghans, participants of the Soviet-Afghan War, who fought in the USSR, didn't get in touch with psychologists No one contacted them, and there was no such institution of assistance to the military. That has led to the fact that we currently have Afghan veterans in psychiatric hospital in Dnipro who are still fighting. They have not returned from the war. How many of them became alcoholics and how many committed suicide? These statistics do not exist. We do not know how many families are affected by this. Divorces, the children of those veterans, we don't know because there is no such information anywhere. Simply no one deals with such statistics. And even in 2014, when the war began, we still faced the fact that our military did not need psychologists.
All this accumulates inside and later begins to pour out, as if from an overflowing glass of water. In 2016, I had a nervous breakdown and spent 2 months in treatment to at least somehow stabilize my condition. Then continued the service. And when I left the armed forces for health reasons, it became a little more difficult. Because when I served and returned to the usual military reality, where my brothers are, as well as mud, blood, deaths and explosions, I was in it for a certain time and it was easier because of that. And when you return home, all this is gone, and many people do not understand you, even civilian psychologists. When you tell them something, you can see in their eyes the lack of understanding. And it's not that they don't want to, they just can't understand you. In my battalion, I rose to the rank of Chief Medical Officer. Divorce is number 1. Suicide is number 2, and alcohol is number 3. It all depends on how you program yourself. After all, we're all fighting for something there. Those who were near didn't want to listen to me and said, "Stop talking about things."
Psychological training, the way we started in 2014, then continued in 2015 and 2016, was the explanation to military personnel of what conditions they may face, not because they are weak, not because they are cowards, but because this is how the nervous system acts. These are states of panic, stupor, fear. This is crying, trembling, apathy. This is delusion and hallucinations. These are crisis states, and in fact, the persons themselves cannot get out of this state. They need help. It is very important to talk about it. It seems so easy to talk about it, but in reality, it is not easy to say "I was scared." Well, a big man who got scared. It's necessary to admit that a person just felt sick because the combat shock at the physiological level is dizziness, a blackout of consciousness, vomiting, uncontrolled urination and defecation. Therefore, this had to be explained, that it's normal, that it's not necessary to be afraid of it, and that the result of such stress can be a temporary loss of vision or a loss of hearing or speech. It's important to stress that it's temporary and that all senses return, because if a person does not know this and is afraid, then it should be treated. And in fact, if the person understands that everything is normal, then even if they have fear, it won't be paralyzing them anymore, and it won't block the nervous system so much that it cannot recover. That is what we were explaining. We were saying what to do if this happens, how to help someone who is nearby and this happens to them, how to track what is happening to them. And in fact, I had such a case. Our battalion Donbass stood here, and it was such an interesting set. They were guys from the Donetsk and Lugansk regions in that battalion, and when I told them all about this, they were sitting there, well, you know, oh, this woman is telling us something, well, that's it.
Ну, вони там хіхікали, сиділи, там таке, знаєш, ну, там, типа, ой, там жіночка нам щось розповідає, ну, таке.
And then we met with them later. Some of them remained in Donbass, and some of them went to the 93rd Brigade. We met with them when they were in the 93rd Brigade. We came to them and one of them said, "Look, I thought of you so often, of what you said then and how we loved then. And when it happened, I think, damn, she was talking about it and we sat laughing." But he remembered, and that's really good. It helped me a lot.
These should be specialists who also have military experience or at least military education. You can communicate with such a psychologist because, first of all, he understands you and your condition. He experienced the same thing. He knows. He found a way out for himself. He can help others. He has practice. Veteran organizations began to appear in 2014. So did the military psychologists. They really help, and there is a great need for them. On the outside, we are all formidable warriors, ready to go to the end, to go to death. But inside, we have a storm of emotions, and when you come home, it's still raging. You look at people going to cafes, living an ordinary life, and you realize that this is what you really fought for, so that they could live this life. But on the inside, inexplicable emotions begin to rise. I don't even know how to describe them. Reluctance to understand what you see. That is, I want to say, how is this possible? This is your country too. There is a war there. People are dying. And then you start to calm yourself down. I believe that veterans need psychological help, because this is a very big problem, and it is hard to live with it. If you don't share with anyone, you can die. I shared. At the moment, I have someone to share with. She listens, yes. You need trust and to be listened to. There's often no one to hear you. Everyone's got their own problems, but it's what's needed. From personal experience, I can say that it is better to go to a psychologist who went through the war on the front lines. Many soldiers have a prejudiced attitude towards psychologists. They say that they will treat me, but I am not sick. And it's true, if a person is a soldier, it doesn't mean that he is crazy. I personally do not have any prejudices against psychologists. This is everyone's personal matter. Each adult will decide for himself whether he needs to talk to a psychologist or not. Nowadays, there's an equal-to-equal practice when a psychologist who is also a military person, a veteran and a participant in hostilities works with military people. They will get along like no other, unlike the case of communicating with a civilian psychologist. There's nothing worse than an unprofessional psychologist to treat someone.
Even the development of psychology itself and the use of psychological services even among the civilian population was poor and on the level of what is this? Since 1995, when psychology appeared in Ukraine, for the first 10 years we still explained to everyone and constantly face the fact that a psychologist is equal to a psychiatrist. These, by the way, are the consequences of the USSR, because psychology began to be killed in 1934. Before 1934, we had research institutes of psychology in Kiev as well, because psychiatry was necessary. Punitive psychiatry appeared in 1934. Psychologists returned legally. They were legalized in 1965. There was some kind of congress and psychology came back. It became legal, but it still remained psychology. That was not the case for applied psychology, so it already works somewhere, that it's used somewhere in wide circles. And as we can see, since 2014 the situation has changed a little, but everything remains the same, at the same level and even now. So I came back to the same claim. I'm healthy, I don't need a psychiatrist. I say so, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm a psychologist. But it doesn't matter. Such confusion. And we went to the strong point, where everyone already knew that psychologists were arriving. We arrived and nobody was there. That's it. They all ran away. We sat down, then I said, well, let's at least have some coffee, since no one is there. Someone is coming, someone should make me that coffee. Well, they just started telling jokes right away. And it begins. There is a face appeared, there is another, and they start crawling around. Yes, the mice crawled up. It's not so scary. Or you could go and ask a question and get an answer. And these were completely different questions. About the relationship with their partners, and about the relationship with the commander, and about their psychological state, and about their physical state, because something hurts somewhere, and they go to the doctor who'll give some pill, but it doesn't help. That's why the first time they're horrified, they don't know what's this. Maybe it's not psychologists at all, but psychiatrists. They'll come and think something about me, tell the commanders, and they will do something with me. This is how it is. It was funny because when we came 2 or 3 times to the same unit, there was the same old song, "Psychologists are coming."
There was a military psychiatrist in the military hospital, an older man in his 60s. In his life he had the experience of communicating with combatants, took part in peacekeeping missions, etc. It was easier to communicate with him than with civilian psychologists. He understood you. He was no stranger to army jokes. And just being engrossed in talking with him, you didn't notice that you had a psychotherapy session. We had only one session with him, after which I was prescribed antidepressants, sedatives, anti-epileptic drugs, and I went home to Transcarpathia.
There was a boy. When he came for the first time, his wife brought him, and he was very tense. Like, here is a psychologist, what is to talk about? And then I no longer remember what I said, but I saw tears in his eyes. I said, well, we won't talk about it anymore. His wife was by his side. And then he called me and said, I can come to you because I don't want to talk about it in front of my wife. We worked with him for almost 2 years, because there was a very difficult story. He had nightmares, and they were related to the fact that one of his brothers in arms died, one of the 3 of them who came together. That fellow soldier began to come to him in his dreams, and it was tough, because it's something to go through. And the fellow soldier kept telling him, why didn't you save me? And he could not save him, because at that time he was already injured and was not in the war. And we only had started working that out a little, and the second died out of their trio. And now the first one began to come again and blame, why didn't you protect him? The second one. And the story goes down a little, it seems to be getting easier. But then he calls again, he says he sees this dream again. In fact, it wasn't them coming to his nightmares, it was his guilt that worked in this way. And it dragged on almost 2 years, and I told him, honey, it's not them coming, it's guilt. You have to stop blaming yourself for the fact that they died. You couldn't have saved them. And his last call was right before the start of the war when he said, "I had a dream about this friend. And it's like in a cartoon. What, again?" He said, "Yes, I saw him in a dream again, and he said, 'Do not blame yourself, you are not guilty, everything is fine.' And I understood that he said it in my words, and that's good."
There are many people with whom our views on the future of our country completely coincide. I fought for Ukraine. I took an oath. This is my homeland. This is a usual adaptation process. You have only a few seconds to tell who are you and what are you doing here. If you can't do anything, just don't get in my way. And you just start saying something like, "Hey friend, what's up? Everything's gonna be fine, everything's gonna be cool and okay," and so on.
At the beginning of this phase, I feel very guilty. It's very difficult for me to say because you communicate with different people, supposedly normal, but they are at a certain distance. And with someone you communicate very close and you remember them. Many guys died and it's still difficult to think of them. When I opened my phone yesterday, they were there.
I saw people fighting without a leg. A highly motivated person cannot be stopped at all. Despite the lack of limbs, they go to fight for their homeland. I found my own, so to speak, psychotherapy in the war. I became an engineer. Explosions totally calmed me down. When I realized that I'm making, for example, mine barriers and securing my guys, or setting traps for the enemy who will die from my mines, it's reassuring. In fact, in civilian life, I'm a very peaceful and calm person. I love animals very much. And war makes us, to a certain extent, terrible creatures who can be completely comforted by the death of other representative of their species. You look at the destroyed enemy and realize that he will no longer be able to kill a child, rape a woman, or pick up a machine gun. And that's cool. A month before the invasion, the patient of mine suggested that I leave the country. He is a high-ranking intelligence officer. He said, "You'd better leave, because things are going to be very bad." However, I stayed. Who, if not me? I have combat experience.
From recent events, actually we started working with him somewhere in 2018. And he came again. His wife brought him. God bless our wives, they take their boys by the hand to see a psychologist. And we walked with him once and it helped him. He left. Then he called because it started again, not very well. And we walked out the second time. He got as he says, "Give me your magic kick again, because it helps." We have worked on it, and when the war started, I realized that he had gone there. It wasn't surprising, because he just couldn't help but go. That's it. I just had classes at the university and I saw that he was calling. I picked up the phone and I was scared because he was choking, tears, hysterical. I'm scared, I can't, I'm going to die. I say, wait, I can't talk right now. You can wait for half an hour because I have classes. He said, I'll wait for half an hour. I called him back half an hour later, as we agreed. We have worked that out, and he said, thank you, it helped me, I calmed down. Then I called back the next day. He said, I'm fine, I came up to stretch, everything's fine. Then I called him because his wife was abroad, there was no connection. He said, no, I'm fine. The reason was that why he was afraid, because his fellow soldiers died, as he believed who were better than him, and now he would definitely die. And when we were walking, I said, you shouldn't think about it, because you should think about what you can do, not what you can do. And it helped him. And he said the following phrase to me. I ask, how are you? And he says, I'm fine, you gave me javelin. I have a javelin with me now. What fool am I not to use it? That is the technique I gave him, he called a javelin. And this, by the way, is the breathing technique, the simplest breathing technique that helped him. And after that, I contacted him several more times, and he said that he destroyed 2 tanks, and that's cool. And then his wife called, he died. It's very difficult. I felt guilty then, because I pushed him to death. Let's say that. Maybe if he got scared and left, he would be alive. He wasn't scared anymore. However, when I told my therapist about it, because we also go to therapists, my therapist said, you didn't send him to die, you gave him the opportunity to live. Thanks to my therapist who formulated this. But he's gone, and it's hard.
Tankers, paratroopers, volunteers, people got used to their new roles, got used to the new reality, and felt comfortable in it. A person has a high ability to adapt. At first it seems as if you are in hell. Over time, you begin to like this hell. From the book The Point of No Return by Dnipro, a volunteer participant in the Russian-Ukrainian war since 2014. More than 30 people were rescued, according to the logbook. About 300 in Lysychansk alone. Then, during the retreat and change of stabilization centers, it reached 173 per day, and in 5 days a whole battalion of the wounded. It's natural selection, and that's how it happened. This is a holy war. It has been going on for millennia, and no one has managed to finish it. But our generation had the honor to finally do it. Our ancestors look at us from eternity. Now everyone is proud of Ukraine. The whole world has seen what Ukrainians are capable of. Someone believed in it and saw it before. Now everyone sees it, all of Ukraine and the whole world. Now they all communicate with us, they listen to us. People have changed a lot. All the communist Soviet evil comes out of people, leaves them. It can be called a kind of exorcism session. This is truly a war between European Ukraine and ugly, despotic Moscow.
And that's why I will continue, because I give them life. I'm word to that idea, that's what I give them life. Maybe some extra moment of that life. Maybe I give them somehow the feeling that life is beautiful and it makes sense to stay alive and not die prematurely. That is, people who came and felt themselves in the war on the spot not because they are some kind of pervert. You know, sometimes they say, it's mentally ill person. No.
This is our fate. We are on the frontier, on the edge of worlds. As it is said in the Decalogue of the Ukrainian nationalist, I am the spirit of the eternal element, which placed you on the edge of the world to create a new life.
The war is about life. It's about life. Why is a war about life? Because that's why they're standing there. They go there not to die. They go so that we live here, that we raise children, that Ukraine remains Ukraine, and not Russia or Orc land. War, this war, it's about life.
I want to start a family, have children. I want my children to live and work in Ukraine. I defend Ukraine and make every effort to destroy our Russian enemy. I want to help returning veterans, both men and women. No matter what, I'm deeply convinced that our victory is as inevitable as tomorrow's dawn.
Попереду Дорошенко, попереду Дорошенко.
The war is a mirror of the soul. If you are good, you will become better. If you are bad, you will become more traumatized. After the war goes on for the life of a person who survived it. How a serviceman's life will be depends on many factors. A psychologist to whom you can entrust your fears is one of the most important, but not always the main one.